Perfect first camera for creating content on social media. What do we need? Great sharp 4K footage with autofocus, flip-out screen and small body with wide range of lens choices. This is Sony ZV-E10 review. Поехали! It's the cheapest Sony camera in APS-C lineup with interchangeable lens mount, and it will cost you about 650 euros and about 80 euros more if you want a crappy kit lens. I have 11mm 1.8 lens. It's a really wide lens and it's not the best for every kind of scenario. Sony have a lot of great lenses and I can make a whole video about it, choosing lens for each purpose. Leave a comment if you want it, and now let's take a look at the body of this camera. At first, this camera looks really similar to Sony A60 line, basically to all Sony APS-C side sensor cameras, but it has some really interesting differences. So it means that it's really light, really compact. You can put it on every gimbal and in every bag. On top we have net that covers microphones. Also not standard shallow depth of field button. It can be useful if you don't know how to properly use your aperture or you don't have time to change it. And zoom switch. It can be digital or in lens if your lens supported it. On the other side we have unusual product showcase button. To my surprise, it is really useful and I will talk about it later in the video. And of course we have flip out screen with really nice bars to show when we're recording. Also we have light here and in front that you can see that you're recording. What also cool that we have mic input. As long as mini HDMI, we cannot expect full HDMI in such a small body, USB-C port and headphone jack that we can monitor our audio. What is not cool that is small size batteries and also SD card on the bottom that makes it not easy to get out if we have big tripod head or gimbal plate. That's it for the body, let's move on. And now let's talk about resolution and crop factors. This camera can shoot 4K at 24 and 30 FPS and also 1080p in 24, 30, 60 and 120 FPS. But what's really surprised me, it's a heavy crop, 22% of the frame in 4K 30 FPS. And it also crops a little bit, about 15% in 120 FPS. So if we watch closely, we can see a huge difference between 4K and 1080p. In my opinion, 1080p 120 FPS it's barely usable. And also I would avoid shoot in 1080p. And now let's talk about bitrate. We have a choice in 4K between 100 and 60 megabits per second. And I have these comparison shots, but it's really hard to see any difference, even at 8x zoom. Only maybe in colors, but it also not so big of a difference. Except we have a huge difference in file sizes. 10 seconds clip in 4K 24 frames per second at 100 megabits weighs 140 megabytes. But the same clip 10 seconds long in 4K 24 frames per second in 60 megabits weighs 76 megabytes. So you see it's almost double of size. If you don't want to do a huge color correction, I recommend you to use 60 bitrate. Also, this camera have options to shoot proxies, but there is a catch and I will talk about it later. Now let's talk about picture profiles. There are a lot of them and you can shoot in most important one SLG, S-Log2, S-Log3. If you want to have full control of your image, of course it's better to use S-Log. S-Log3 is really hard to color grade in 8-bit color, so I would recommend you better to use S-Log2. And difference in dynamic range it's not so dramatic. And for everyday stuff, when you don't want to be so precise in exposure, I recommend you to use SLG, because it also gives you a really nice dynamic range, a lot easier to work with and to watch on screen. This is a crop camera and it means that it's not gonna be so good at low light as full frame Sony cameras. But in my opinion, it's decent enough. I wouldn't go higher than 16,000 on SLG 3. In this log, after 6400, I noticed boost of noise and losing of sharpness, but image still usable overall, and you can go up to 60,000, but it's not gonna be so good. In terms of autofocus, this camera is a beast. It works for me every time, especially in this kind of shots or when I shoot humans. If it picks up eye, it didn't lose it. I try to use it on tight lens and on wide lens, and it always works. But when I tested product showcase button, I also wanted to try proxy, and turns out that I lose eye tracking feature and face recognition. And at first I didn't understand what's going on, because camera didn't want to pick up my face if I block with something, but then I turned proxies off and it started to work again. So here is the catch with proxy: if you enable it, you will lose eye tracking autofocus. It's really strange, but it is how it is. But this issue also helped me understand how this product showcase works. Basically, it turned on and off face recognition feature, and it's focused on closest to the lens subjects. That's simple. And now I'm afraid I need to go outside to test stabilization and mics on this camera. So now I'm doing vlogging test and how it looks for you. Now I'm in stabilization mode. And this is without stabilization. Image looks much wider, but is it shaky or no? I'm just holding it like in a hand. And also, what do you think about this place? Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 people can play here at the same time in Pac-Man. If I have friends here, it will be nice. And now I'm on lightless street, and let's try auto ISO and auto white balance. And also I holding camera on selfie stick and how is stabilization. And now I'm turned on stabilization, and I have to extend my arm a little bit longer to get the same field of view. And also I turned off my wireless go, and you hear just from mics on the camera. So how does it sound? Doesn't sound really terrible, or you can live with that. I'm really curious, because sometimes it's hard to get mics on top, and it will be much easier to use internal mics. But if you wanna stay still and talk to the camera, this is how it would look. If I get a move a little bit, if I get more intense, if I wanna say something really important to you, it would look like this. And I wanna talk with you really intense again, because I wanna say something really important to you. And now how it's gonna look with stabilization on. And now here's a nice opportunity to test internal mics on this camera. How can you hear me? Of course it will be much better with my Rode Wireless Go. Now we're in elevator, and you hear from my Rode Wireless Go. And now you hear from internal mics. How it sounds? Okay, now we're outside on the street, and I'm talking like normal, not trying to scream. Because it's not comfortable. And now you hear through Rode Wireless Go. So right now I'm on a much busier street, and as you can hear the big truck going by. And how does it sound? 1, 2, 3. How you can hear me? It's actually pretty silent in Berlin right now, because it's Sunday. Everybody is asleep. And how was that? I bet it was much nicer sound, but how bad was the internal mics? And let's try one more thing. Let's say you find a really interesting location for your vlog, and you want to do some handheld B-roll shots. Can you do it with stabilization or without stabilization? Of course, it's sad that this camera doesn't have IBIS, but for the most people, active stabilization will be okay. And built-in mic, it's good to have it. It sounds not bad, but of course, better to use external options. Of course, it would be nice to have IBIS, but active stabilization decent enough, and you can go handheld with it. But heavy crop factor, it's disappointing, it's sad, but you can use wide-angle lens like this 11 and you will be okay. Internal mic really surprised me on the street. because you still can hear me. Of course, quality not the best in the world. It's nice to have it because you can go only with the camera body to the street and record some vlogs. And if you want more professional quality, you always can use external ones. In terms of battery life, you can record about 20 or 30 minutes on one battery. And also this camera have USB power delivery, and you can record and charge it, but it have one problem. Actually, I'm recording 4K 24 frames per second about 15 minutes and camera powered by this power bank. And now I have on the screen temperature icon. I don't know what it means. Will camera shut off or no? I guess I will test it later. And after a few minutes of the sign, camera shuts off. It's a little bit hot, and as you can see, it's low in power, and I think that was the main problem, that camera was completely empty on a battery. And while recording it, I charged it through USB-C. So I guess you have to buy a few of these small little batteries and it will be good, but it's a little bit disappointing that Sony have overheating problem. Okay, as a proof, this camera was recorded for 20 minutes and I accidentally turned off and off record, so here it says 12 minutes, but it's still impressive. And it was cooling about 5 minutes. And I think that camera is going to shut down in 2 or 3 minutes. And honestly, I don't want to check it because I don't want the camera to overheat too much, because I plan to use actually this camera. Yeah, it's definitely hot right now, so I'm gonna unplug it. And here is the sign. Unfortunately, this camera doesn't like charge herself while recording, so this is a bummer, but it's good that it can actually work with power, so it's nice. And guys, I hope that's it for review this Sony ZV-E10. Is it a perfect camera? Definitely no. Is it good for YouTube and content creation in general? Yes, especially for the price. I will be happy to continue to using this camera, and also next video is gonna be test between this camera and FX30. I think it would be really interesting. Thank you very much for watching, subscribe for more, и пока! And now I have to wait when this camera is gonna overheat.